development. My role here is to introduce four gentlemen that most of you likely already know quite well. Sebastian Bay, Matt Caffrey, Paul Weber, and Ed McCready. The four of these gentlemen do war games across the echelons and across the spectrum. So at this point, Jeff is going to mute his camera, turn off his camera, he's going to mute his mic, and I'll turn it over to the panel.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Okay, by now everybody knows I'm me. This is the final block of what used to be the First Timers Day. For about 10 years, Connections would have the folks that never attended Connections before show up a day early and get enough information on wargaming so they could understand and benefit from the rest of the conference. And just a little bit of background, we found everybody was showing up a day early. So we started to include courses and things other than fundamentals. And that's kind of the way we got to today. And the final block of the first timers was usually, what do you do next? And obviously, you continue attending this Connections conference and see a lot of the great stuff that's coming up later in the week. But there's more to do than that. And so we're going to have some general advice from my fellow panelists and myself. But then I'm going to do something that's both virtuous and in self-interest. I'm one of the folks that teach a course in wargaming here. I think maybe all of us teach at some element of wargaming, but I always conclude with, here's some stuff that you can use to continue your development. Once we get done with our general advice, we'll be bringing up those slides, and I think there's a 100% chance there's going to be some reading, some books, some websites, some other stuff to add to that. So you'll get at least some initial ideas on things, and then from my fellow panelists and from you perhaps adding into the chat, there'll be some nominees for things some specifics to add to that. But again, before we get to the specifics, let's start talking about general advice. So you now know the basics. The rest of the week will help you go a little beyond the basics. But when this is over, do you need to, and what can you do to continue your development as a wargamer? So Paul, you're up first. And need to unmute. Paul, you need to unmute.
Yep. They caught me again. Yeah, I like to put a little cartoon in the Discord to get things going. My mantra is play games to design games. When it comes to professional development, the more you know about the whole range of gaming and types of gaming and game mechanics and things that are out there, the larger toolbox you have to draw on when it comes to do professional gaming. And when I say professional gaming, I come at it from a small group more, there's the institutional Title 10 kind of gaming at the war colleges. What I do tends to be more small group technology oriented. And even within the context of some of those larger games, there's often a lot of supporting efforts or preliminary efforts that are not as I don't want to say orchestrated, but not as well. They are learning experiences for the people that end up moving to the point where they do those kinds of events. So there's a building block process. So I'd say that you're never too old to start gaming, but if you don't start gaming, you'll get a lot older faster. So I'll leave it at that and pass it over to Ed.
Well, thanks, Paul. In thinking through this, my reaction is just do the damn thing, because that is how you really learn what you're doing. And you say, oh, I don't have a job in it. I don't know what to do next. Well, okay, let's start with a hobby side. I'm sure that just about everybody here reads a couple of hobby magazines, plays a hobby war game, thinks about hobby war games, about probably more amount of their time than any of their family members would want them to. Okay. Some of us paint miniatures more than our family members would want us to. You gotta have that kind of commitment in order to sort of compete with the people that are out there having that sort of commitment. So if you are that committed to your hobby gaming side, and I usually don't push hobby gaming that much, but if you're committed to your hobby gaming side, pick up your role-playing games, run a role-playing game, run multiple campaigns as a role-playing game. You don't have a job with it yet, but role-playing games will teach you a lot of what you need to know about player management, about how to manage in public and how to tell a story in public, how to speak, and how to think on your feet. Because a lot of what we do is thinking on our feet as we control games. So hobby RPGs are a great way for you to practice those skills in terms of getting things done. Likewise, miniature gaming, with little toy soldiers. It's not the toy soldiers, it's the fact that miniatures rules are often dynamically designed. They're redesigned. They also teach you a lot of tactical principles. Even if you're playing Napoleonics or Ancients, they're going to teach you tactical principles, which you need to know if you're going to do those small unit kind of games. What I would advise you against is playing a lot of Euro games. I don't think Euro games do much for you as a novice designer. As an advanced designer, I think they really help you think through some complex player management issues and control management issues, but I don't think they help you very much as a novice player. Finally, design your own games. We end all of our courses, I assume Matt does too, I don't know. I certainly know Sebastian does. We end all of our courses with a practicum, design a game. Well, that's not the end. It's not like write a thesis and now you're an expert on whatever you just wrote your thesis on. It's the start, it's not the end. So design a game that you're passionate about the topic you want to do, and pick a topic that's not obvious. I want to do a game on the Battle of the Bulge. Well, that's a really, really obvious topic. Do a game on something that the space race. Do a game on running a business. Do a game on something that puts you out of your comfort zone so it makes you think about the various design pieces. And I probably talked too long, but that's my speech on what you should do after you finish one of our courses.
Sebastian?
Yeah, so I am with Ed and Paul in the sense that I think playing lots of games, being exposed to lots of games, being able to be literate and versed in a wide range of game mechanics and game rules is hugely beneficial to your professional design abilities, and is a constant way to stay up to date with all the different commercial innovations, ideas for your own games. Like, there are many times I borrow elements that I saw in games, in other people's professional games, or in hobby games that I played or encountered. And I'm like, oh, this would be great for a resource allocation game, I don't know, on Navy resources in whatever context, right? But at the same time, I think there is a missing element in a lot of our wargaming training pipeline. And I've mentioned this before, where there's a proliferation, or there's more intro classes like my class at Georgetown at the U.S. Naval Academy, and the Moore's classes and the certificate programs. But there is not a lot of continuing education, and Moore's has tried to fill this gap over the years, but is not something that is super prevalent in our field. And I think we need more than just classes that we can attend, but whether it be workshops or fellowships. You know what I mean? Like my fellowship at the Krulak Center, where I got to work with a bunch of Marine Corps commands and units, and being able to interact with them in a sense of wargaming, supporting classes, supporting EWS or SAW. That was really beneficial to me as a designer, because it made me do a lot of different things I didn't do before. One of the things I will say is that every organization I've ever worked for as a gamer has its own niche, has its own preferences, has its own brand of gaming it does. Some may do more matrix games, some may do more operational and tactical gaming. And I think it's really useful if you're able to get a wide range of experiences. Like if you're able to go on an IPA or go on a fellowship to a different organization that does a different brand of gaming than you're used to, and then you're able to widen the tool sets that you have.
You guys just about covered everything I was going to say. Agree with everything, and especially what Sebastian talked about. I was getting ready to talk about. I was active duty for a while and then a reservist, and we moved around. My wife taught different places, and you have some teachers that teach first grade in the same school for 20 years, and they like to say they have 20 years of experience, but they really have 1 year of experience 20 times. And Gail taught in different schools with different types of kids and different grade levels and all the rest. And I think her experience was actually made her a better teacher. And so it's already been said to be a better wargamer, do more wargaming, but do more diverse wargaming. That they talked about miniatures. You probably wouldn't want to only do any one type of wargaming, certainly not miniatures. Board wargaming, I'm sorry, that's my prejudice. Board wargaming, the rules are right there in front of you. There's no black box code. So you get to, the adjudication is what's written out in black and white. Computer war games have great strengths. You've got the automated opponent, sometimes AI subordinates. You have all the artificial intelligence that can be shown much better than on a board game, and that's just on the hobby side. I've played in Title 10 war games for every service except the Marine Corps. I've got to fix that before I retire. But everybody does it differently, and part of that is what they already know. Part of that is everybody has slightly different requirements. So the broader the spectrum you get, the more effective you're going to be. I was privileged to hear Chuck Yeager speak shortly after the book The Right Stuff came out, when he was at his height of fame and popularity. And somebody threw him a softball question about, hey, why are you such a great pilot? And he started with a glib answer, but he said, no, let me also give a serious answer to that. I was a test pilot at Wright-Patterson, and the test pilots and the testing of aircraft was Wright-Patterson on the edge of an urban area instead of Edwards for several years after World War II, until there was one too many crashes. And we got all the Japanese and German and Italian aircraft in after the war, and I flew them all to report on the characteristics of this and that and everything else. And so when I was testing our new aircraft, I had this wide breadth of experience of how different aircraft react under different circumstances, and I was able to anticipate when something was going to go into a stall or was going to have some other difficulty. So the more different war games you know, the bigger your toolbox, and the more likely it will be when you come up with a challenge, there's something that you can use. And maybe use as is out of the box may happen once or twice in a career, but if you have to adapt it, you're still going to save a lot of effort. And if all you're going to do is just steal one rule structure, that's still a big benefit. So that's our initial around the circle. Anything anybody else wants to add before we bring up the slides? Any other general advice?
Yeah, I would say one thing I forgot to say is that, again, you can't be unbalanced. You can't be just a good game designer and succeed, or you just can't be a good facilitator. You need to be a good analyst, and you need to be a good manager, leader of people. And so you can work on all those different pillars without necessarily having a job specifically in war game design.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And again, I did wargaming for years before it appeared officially in my job description. And the work I did before it was in my job description gave me credentials and abilities that helped me get into a job where wargaming was in the job description. Okay, Jeff, if you could bring up the slides. So yeah, I'm high tech. What can you say? No effort was spared. So let's go on to the next slide. And of course, if I'm showing slides, I always need a disclaimer. Next. Okay, so here is some of the organizations that can help you. And again, in the chat, or if you're on the panel, unmute and speak up. Connections, US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, France. Hopefully, Chris Weave is going to continue online connections even after the Connections Live conference the Connections conference goes back live. And then, of course, the Moores folks. Hopefully, some of you participated in Moores. Those are the operations research guys, and really, really, really very valuable organization. Moores has proven themselves over and over and over again as people that can really make a very substantial contribution to national defense. And let's get back to the earlier point. It's very seldom the war game designer only designs war games, and you're probably more valuable if you're a war game designer and an ops planner, or a war game designer and an operations research guy. The overlap is a plus. Georgetown University Wargaming Society. I don't know how Sebastian does it, but he gets outstanding speaker after outstanding speaker. They're all free. You can log in anytime you want. He has them on YouTube after it's over. Just really good stuff, and fairly frequent too. The King's College London folks, very prestigious speakers, very important topics. Again, we talked about the bigger your toolbox, the better. Just hearing what they have to say from the other side of the Atlantic is a plus, even in and of itself. And then the Center for New American Security online issue wargaming information. This is one that I need to get smarter about. This has been recommended by multiple people, and an area where I need to get to start benefiting from myself. Now, the odds are zero that this list of organizations is complete. If you're on the panel and you have something, please speak up. If you're not on the panel and there's an organization you'd like to add, please add it in the chat. And I have a wonderful human being that's going to be sending me all the suggestions. Anybody on the panel with additional organizations that should have been on this list and will be?
I would add the U.S. Naval Academy, and I know the U.S. Air Force Academy is also has its own wargaming simulation center. I think it's called the Multi-Domain Lab. Okay,
is that just internal to the two organizations? Like if you live in, say, Ohio or the D.C. area, are there talks you can log into, or
I won't speak. I won't speak too much for the Air Force Academy and its MDL, but I know for the U.S. Naval Academy, which I help with, we are trying to do more of a lecture series as well, and we do some wargaming topics on Purple Hall, which is the U.S. Naval Academy Museum podcast, which is available to everyone online via iTunes and other platforms and SoundCloud, and we also try to do more externally focused, but also collaborative war games between other academies, pre-commissioning academies like West Point and the U.S. Air Force Academy. But we're also trying to do more with reservists and active duties in the NCR. So
cool. So could you put into the chat the URL that could get you to previous Naval Academy talks on wargaming? Or how would somebody see some of these or learn more?
Yeah, I'll toss the link into both the Discord and our chat here on StreamYard.
Okay, very good. Okay, So here are just some of the books, and I'm really sure I don't have all of them. I'm listing The Art of Wargaming first, very consciously. Peter Perla did an outstanding job, and Peter is both a wargamer's wargamer and an analyst's analyst. And as I said before, the best wargamers aren't purely wargamers; they're wargamers and Peter not only talks about wargaming, but how wargaming fits in an overall analytical effort. So very, very valuable book. In all humility, I'm no Peter Perla, but I wrote a couple of decades after he did. So there's a lot of the history that happened after he wrote, and I did find a few things he missed. So very strong on the history of wargaming. And those of you who want to participate in my game lab coming up, you can help the second edition be even better. Wargame design by the S&T staff. This was published decades ago, but I don't know if anything else is good. Very much the nuts and bolts of how to go about doing a design. Still very useful for print war games, but really for any war game design. Simulating War by Dr. Sabin. Absolutely a pivotal book in the field. Wargamers Handbook, U.S. Naval War College, excellent. Army Wargaming Handbook, also great. The Wargaming Handbook of the Ministry of Defense in the UK, an excellent guide, very short, so a very quick read, and maybe too short because one of the principal authors, Graham Langley Brown, basically expanded it out into Successful Professional Wargaming, a practitioner's handbook that goes into much more depth and has a lot of the specifics on how to make things happen. And then I listed Zones of Control last, not because it's the least valuable of these books, but because I think you probably should actually read it last, in that it's an anthology. And so it has all the strengths and weaknesses of an anthology. Not all the chapters are uniformly excellent, although overall it sets a very high bar, but they're very specialized. So once you have a basic understanding of wargaming, Zones of Control can help you zoom in and get better understandings of how to do different aspects of wargaming. So again, this is the current list. Any books to add?
Yeah, well, Matt, I would suggest I put.
Go back.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I put a link to my book in the chat. Even though it's on disease response, I go into a lot of detail about practical examples for designing games. Every other chapter is a game design, so it's very relevant for anybody that's trying to design games.
My apologies. I didn't know you had a book. I'm embarrassed to not know that. When was it published?
About 6 months ago, I want to say. It's
okay.
on gaming disease response. It's fairly new.
Okay, well that makes me feel a little less guilty. Okay, and what's the title again?
It's gaming disease. It's gaming disease disease response.
Oh, very timely.
Response. Gaming disease response for healthcare professionals.
Okay. Well, that brings up another point that wargaming goes beyond war. Any other books to add?
I added them in the list.
So
okay.
Yeah, so I'll add verbally two books. One I use for my class, which is Tabletop Analog Game Design, which is a small annotated volume about small articles about different elements of game design, whether it be randomness, player behavior. It's really easy to read. It's really accessible, quick read for beginners. And I found it to be really insightful and useful for first-time designers. The other one is more of a reference book. It's a little expensive, but it's called Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design, an Encyclopedia of Mechanics or Mechanisms. It's by one I forget the second author, but it's by Jeff Engelstein, who is a great designer of great renown in the commercial realm. And I think he does a great job of putting literally an encyclopedia of game mechanics, whether it be resource management, types of adjudication, voting mechanics. And it's really great because he gives you a description of how the basic mechanics works, but also examples of where what games use these kind of mechanics. I found it to be super useful for first-time designers who don't have that innate repository of experience yet of the different kinds of game mechanics that are out there, to start thinking about game mechanics they can use and leverage. Like for instance, a lot of us who have been longtime gamers, we already built those that experience of mechanics over time through our own hobby gaming and in time and investment. But this is good for first-time people who are not hobby gamers.
Okay, excellent. That really fills a void. This is helping me too.
I posted a thing that has the table of contents for that book.
Oh, okay, very good.
You can also do a search. If you do a search on Board Game Geek, that you can actually search on game mechanics, and it'll give you lists of games that use certain game mechanics. And there's a little dictionary that describes what they are.
Okay. Well, that brings up the next topic. Anything else on books? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Oh, here it is. Okay, so websites. Unfortunately, you have to have a CAC card. In fact, you have to be on the SIPR network. But it was discussed earlier today. Is there? There's a repository of modeling and simulation tools that are used within DoD. Is there a repository of war games? And depending on how you define repository and everything else, the answer may be yes and no. The closest we get is the DoD war game repository, which isn't so much a list of war game types, but specific war games that have taken place since, I don't know if anybody knows the year, but probably around 2012 or so, maybe 14. When they first set it up, they went back like 3 years, and it's been around for a number of years now. So it goes back fairly far. And in some cases, you can download the game report, and it has who to contact to get more information. You can search by different criteria. And the site is more than just the war games. It has other information that's available on that. But again, unfortunately, it's not only government only, but it's at the secret level. And then AFMC, my parent command that Air Force Research Lab reports to, has a war game site. But again, you need a CAC card. It's not classified, but you need a CAC card. And I suspect a lot of the other organizations around the government also have their own SharePoint site or other site. So that might be a useful thing to build to send out, U.S. government only, unclassified, but I haven't built that yet. And then as far as the public goes, connectionswargaming.com, that's the site for this conference. And right from the very beginning, we wanted it to be a 24/7, 365 resource for information on wargaming. But it was always the next priority after the conference. And each conference, we started getting ready for the next conference. So we have some past stuff there. Stephen Downs Martin is putting an enormous amount of time and effort, as is Paul Weber, as is Merle, Robinson, and a number of other people into finding as many of the previous Connections conferences slides to put up on that and everything else. And we're working with the Morse people to get a compendium of wargame terms and a bibliography of wargaming sources, like those books and websites that I'm talking about, onto it. And it would be online. It would be on the Connections website, but it could be linkable from the Moore's website, and of course from Connections. And then PACSIM out of Canada excellent source of information on Canadian wargaming. And I think the Canadians are actually ahead of us in peace gaming and moral factors, conditions other than war, a lot of the more human factors parts of wargaming that tend to be left out when you're doing kinetics. And it's not just that, but it's a very good source of information, and with a little extra in that area. And then I've already talked about King's College Wargaming Network, that all their past stuff is on YouTube. Then warontherocks.com. There's articles, and then articles that answer the earlier articles, and then articles that comment on the articles before. So if you want to dialogue about the current thinking in wargaming, War on the Rocks is a good place to go. Then you have the strategy page that has information not only wargaming but other things. And then I don't know how I missed Wargame Geek, but that should be up there too. And then armchair dragoons.com. That's a relatively well, not really new, but hasn't been around for that many years, and it also deals with mostly commercial wargaming and things to build up that site. So, anything from the panel as far as adding either government or public sites?
Consim World has a lot of good stuff on it.
Okay.
I'll put their link here just a sec.
Yeah, so I put a bunch of links in the Discord channel, including tabletop history, which is great. And it also has lots of great primers on lecturers about game design. I also added Games for Change for those who are not like strictly war game designers, but they do a lot of educational games and games that are socially minded or educationally minded. I also added the UK Fight Club's website. They do a lot of events that are open to a lot of US and British partners when they do games online via Steam or Tabletop Simulator and other ways. But I put those in the Discord already.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, it's good to link into those guys, because it would have been nice to have an actual briefing on that at Connections. But this was just a few people saying, hey, let's put on a show. And one of their 4-stars is involved, and people in their academies, and they've had all these events. It's really has exploded, and there's several people in the United States looking at possibly doing a U.S. version, and I think some other nations are looking at that too. And it's an idea that's really overdue to catch on. That if somebody reads a lot of history, and particularly military history about great military commanders, Patton did that, all these folks did that, and it's seen as a positive good, as something that would make them more effective. We should view people that do a lot of gaming as a positive good. I know the German military did. The Soviet military celebrated their chess champions. This fight club is intended to encourage people to get better at war. What a shocking thing for a military to do. Anybody else with anything else to add as far as sources? Okay, we still have, or do we? Yeah, we still have plenty of time. Any questions from those in the audience asking for specific thoughts or questions on how to continue your development once we all say goodbye until next year on Friday? I guess if our moderator could read from the chat or post it, moderators had done that earlier today. Any questions we might have or might be coming in?
There were a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
So actually, before we jump into questions, one thing I did want to say is that I think even for myself, I learned a lot about doing games online, both for my class and for work, for DoD. And one of the things I've learned is like how to like prototype games in Tabletop Simulator and Vassal. And I think that's really a useful skill to have moving forward as distributed and digital gaming becomes more prevalent, and to increase our literacy, like technologically, whether it be Zoom, Discord, StreamYard, Tabletop Simulator, Component Studios is software I use through GameCrafter a lot, and I've gotten very literate on it over the last year, and I'm learning a lot from other people who are teaching me how to do things in Tabletop Simulator and script things. I think that's a skill that many of us should start, leaning into, right? So it's not such a high bar when someone asks us to do distributed and digital gaming.
Okay, so that's great. Thank you, Sebastian. So we should really add a category or another slide to my final briefing, and that is tools that wargamers should work to become proficient in. So I will do that. Ed, you look like you're going to say something.
No, I was just going to read one of the questions. That's all.
Oh, please go ahead.
Okay. When expanding your range of war games, role-playing games, analytical games, and course of action games, what other genre games are available to professional wargamers? I think the question is, what outside of the normal list of what you would expect for war games, what would you say are types of games that people would want to look at? I added social deduction games, for example.
Okay, what if you're already in government or you're already in the military? Each service wants their games to be at least a certain amount joint. No service goes to war completely by itself. But for some weird reason, Air Force games tend to be mainly Air Force, Navy games tend to be mainly Navy, but you have people from other services. And if you have a chance to volunteer, well, first, if you have a chance to volunteer to participate in any war game, always take the opportunity, because even if it's your own service and it's something you already sort of kind of know, you get more experience. But especially if they need somebody to participate in a sister service war game, I've found every time I've done that, I've learned a great deal. It's really a great experience. Anybody else?
I know you loved having the real red, the Navy, show up at your Air Force games, Matt.
Yeah.
The Navy's not the enemy; they're just the adversary.
I will add that there's sort of everybody that's trying to get into gaming wants, like, what games do I play? But I think there's a continuing professional development requirement for senior gamers to continue looking at games. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of churn in the RPG side, to a lesser extent in the role-playing side. Certainly in the Euro side, there's constant churn of new ideas, new systems, new ways of doing things. There's a lot of social and personal games coming out, talking about in real life kind of impacts from doing the games. That's just an example for role-playing games. And so I think keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on with respect to some of these other and perhaps more unusual types of games is more difficult. You're not going to find them in your friendly local game store. You're going to have to dig a little bit, but keeping up to date with some of these things, I think, would really seriously impact the creativity within the profession.
Very good.
Oh, I was just typing an answer to this to John Curry in the chat, and I know from my point of view, the sponsors I work with are chafing at the bit to get people back into the same room together. For a lot of the type of small group gaming that I do, the aesthetic of particularly having guys in uniform and the engineer, technology, analyst guys around the same table communicating with each other, that in and of itself is a huge piece of the experience of having the game. That said, because of the pandemic, we've gotten a lot of resources for doing distributed asynchronous kind of gaming. So I think whereas before people would have defaulted to the face-to-face, we've got a lot more resource that's been able to enable us to do more distributed asynchronous gaming going forward. Over.
Okay, I would agree with Paul. There does seem to be a lot of push to get back to wargaming in person, but there's also a fair amount of discussion of what is sometimes called hybrid wargaming, where you have clusters of people doing the war game live that are connected virtually. So if you think about it, in a in-person war game, you've got the blue team in one room and the red team in another room and the adjudicators in another room, so the red and blue don't overhear what the adjudicators are saying. Well, why do all those rooms need to be in the same building? Yes, the face-to-face interaction among blue players is very valuable, but you don't have much face-to-face interaction between the red and the blue. So there's, who knows how it's going to shake out, but I think there might be some movement in the direction of games that are in person, but taking place in multiple locations. Yes, Dad.
Yeah, I was just trying to unmute. I literally just got back last week from doing a face-to-face game up in New Jersey. It was a pain in the butt because we had to wear masks all the time, which meant that it was very hard to project as the game controller. I think what's emerging is sort of a hybrid model where I just put that in the chat, where what you're going to have is you're going to have hybrid games, which I've also done, where you have some people face-to-face working, you have a face-to-face controller, and then you have a virtual controller. That was a very interesting experience because while the face-to-face controller had to walk everywhere, I could teleport, and so as the virtual one. So it's going to give you some very interesting game control challenges, issues. And then I think that there's going to be some games that remain virtual because they can reach a larger audience, like I suspect, but I don't know, the CNAS conference games would be more logically done in a virtual environment because we can have 1,000 people attend as opposed to a face-to-face kind of game and participate, which is a lot easier done in virtual than it is in face-to-face. And others will go back to being face-to-face. Like most of the classified games are already going, right? I mean, you're not going to do that online very easily. If you do, it's going to be all classified. It's going to break. But I think those are going to go back face to face. I know they've been going on for months now. People have been back in rooms doing classified games. So I think you're going to get a mix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I agree with Ed. I think we're going to go back to a mix. But I think the interesting bit for us as designers, both professionally and educationally, is that what does the mix or advancing the virtual gaming options provide us in terms of design, right? Like I was talking to some colleagues about game designs about in the virtual realm. We're like, well, instead of having our participants for 5 straight days in a building, in a room somewhere to do a game, maybe you can have them 1 day a month for the next 6 months, right? What kind of other game designs can we do with that kind of arrangement? Or what if we do asynchronous gaming when we're working with Indo-PACOM and UCOM and other places across time zones, right? I think that's a very interesting way to, especially if we're going to fight as a global joint force, then you also have to start thinking about how to war game as a global and joint force. I think that will be interesting. Also, I think it will be entirely frustrating because I've never done a digital game where the IT and like the G6 and G9 have not been absolutely like terrors. But I think that's a part of the growing process. I think also hybrid virtual and digital or face-to-face and digital environments are really interesting as game designer, as Ed mentioned before. I think our field is going through a very interesting growing stage for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, when you don't have to leave on Friday to make it home from your TDY by the weekend, then all sorts of different things become possible.
Yeah, we also had someone follow up say that will the virtual environment allow for more international sorts of games? And I do think what it does is it allows for more international customers. I know I've been doing games for a lot of different kinds of countries, and so and you can just zoom them in, and so you're good to go. Except that everybody wants to use Teams, and Teams is a freaking nightmare when you try to use it. So Teams will destroy our ability to do virtual games. I guarantee you, Teams is a cyber attack conducted by either Russia or China.
So I also think PowerPoint is a Russian information operations. So I agree with Ed on Teams. But even for Goose, when we do educational games that are just really designed for our students to get exposed to different games, the virtual gaming options have vastly improved our options of getting people to join our games, but also getting other people who are not based in the NCR around the Georgetown area to participate in our games. Like more than half of our membership are not Georgetown students. So we get we've done games with people in Australia and Japan and Europe with our Georgetown students, and I think it benefits our students and our organization tremendously for being able to do those kind of things. Like the Army War College, Lieutenant Colonel Derek Martin, they've done a Matrix game via Blackboard for us every semester. And that's been amazing for our students, and and that crowd has been active duty officers, reservists, civilian analysts, and our students. And I think that mix of players really benefits our students in a lot of ways.
Yeah, good stuff. And if you you call up a reservist from home to participate virtually, you don't have to pay for a TDY. Okay.
So the confidence of novice wargamers, nothing builds confidence like success, or at least the lack of failure. And I think one of the things that we found very helpful is the idea of getting, we do it through, we have these funds for professional development, and having people do game projects on a topic that you may not be able to just do a game on anything, but you find the technical discipline, and you have someone run a game on a topic related to technology, like basically representing a technology in a game, and you give them a chance to run the game, where the goal is not the success of the game. The game is simply part of the investigation or a tool to try to understand the technology. So that has two things. One, it helps the people understand the technology where they're, trying to understand that. And it gives them an opportunity to run a game or something close to a game where the expectations are such that they're not like, there's no big sponsor, there's no senior people at the game. It's a peer activity to try to help understand something. And that's worked out pretty well.
Okay.
So to quickly piggyback on what Paul mentioned is, I think, success is the best recipe for confidence for beginning designers. But how do you do that? So for me personally, this is just a personal experience. I have young designers, and my students usually modify a commercial game they already know and play. And usually I give them a task and be like, hey, take Axis and Allies that we played throughout the semester and add an element that you think would advance the game, and whether it's a learning objective, a particular thing it is missing, and adapt it. All right, and then we'll play your adapted Axis and Allies game. And usually that's a really easy sort of like double hitter that you can set them up with, and there's not a lot of room for failure. Like, for example, you can just be like, hey, how would you incorporate logistics into Axis and Allies, keeping everything else the same or modifying things, right? How would you do that? And you don't ask them to like research a whole topic or build a game from scratch, because that can be daunting. And you just set them up for an easy sort of underhanded throw, and they can knock it out of the park. And I think that's an easy way to go forward.
Sounds good. Any more questions? All right, here comes another one, I think. Yeah, I need to add a slide on all the courses. There's starting to be a few. I'm teaching my course again this fall, September or October, sometime in that area. Moores has its certificate program. Georgetown has its program. The Naval Postgraduate School not only has a course at the school, but they have a mobile training team that goes out. And I think there's people that are hosting a Connections conference this year that sometime teach something about wargaming. So there's several out there. Which have I missed?
Ed, you want to talk about Moors?
Oh yeah, or go into more detail.
Sure. Moors is not a government run course. It is a team course between Virginia Tech and Moors. We run multiple courses, not just for the elementary, for the basic introduction to wargaming certificate course, but also for other topical areas, which I talked about in the Moors session. We do cyber, we do disease. We have a new offering for Homeland Security. We're going to have actually people, practitioners of Homeland Security war games, teach the course. And we do tactical wargaming, which Paul's involved in. Paul's involved in a lot of these. Tactical wargaming, where we cover air, surface, and naval. And we also we have another one somewhere. We do cyber, disease, general, and tactical. And we're adding Homeland Security. So we try to cover the topical waterfront as much as possible. And the way we run things, if people sign up, we have the course. If people don't sign up, we drop the course. And so just like a regular university. So.
And that's open to anybody, right? You don't have to be a government employee.
It is open to anybody. It is completely unclassified. We have many foreign students in the class.
And then I will plug James Starrett and Mike Dunn's course at Command General Staff College, who's actually our sponsor, along with the foundation for Connections this year. And they do awesome educational wargaming support and design courses, whose classes and syllabus I shamelessly plagiarized from and was inspired by for my Georgetown class as well, along with Ed's work at Moores. Another one is that I teach at Command and Staff College down at Marine Corps University for majors. And I teach the same course I teach at Georgetown, which is a design course. And that was the first year we did that, was this past year as an elective.
Yeah, so there's several out there, and I probably should add a page to my outbrief. Good question. Beats me. Anybody know the answer to that one?
So I've used like concept board and whiteboard and like and other things like that that are more interactive. I also am a big fan of the Zoom whiteboard feature as someone who like does a lot of design meetings with students and office hours with them. So that's one way where everyone can sort of workshop around a whiteboard, and it has a very similar feel to as if you're in a classroom walking around a chalkboard. I really like that element to it. It's not so much super useful for games when you're trying to do digital distributive games, but that's a good way for if you're trying to do design virtually and distributively.
Yeah, I'll put in a plug. You know, the way I like to run games virtually, and I run a lot of them, is Zoom plus Slack. I really like Slack as a chat. Now, of course, Slack is not cheap, and you have to have kind of a corporate license for it to make it work, really. But what Slack does is it lets me put large file. It's very seamless with respect to file transfer, with respect to chat. I can control the chat. It's kind of like Discord, but better in some ways, and again, more expensive. And that's my favorite platform. And I've used about 5 or 6 platforms, ranging from MS Team to something called Shindig. I think Zoom plus Slack is the best combination.
Okay, very good. We still have time for a few more. Go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say, except for Discord, that I like better than Slack, but then I'm not a slacker.
Okay. Any other questions?
Ed, you're not smiling. I thought I made it funny.
I was trying to figure out what Moet was saying in the chat. That's an ongoing degradation of the Brits.
No more questions. Okay. Well, there's nothing wrong with wrapping up a minute or two early. So I normally thank the participants and our panelists. I want to be particularly grateful and thankful today because I've got a bunch of things to add to the last slides of my course. And we are now into the full-fledged portion of the Connections Conference. So if you're interested in helping out with Connections next year, you see what's at the bottom of your screen. This is all the wargaming community supporting the wargame community. Nobody gets paid. Nobody does this full time. The only people that don't have an end day job are those that have retired. So see you at Connections tomorrow. And thank you all again.
Thanks, Matt, for having us. It was great.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Saban. Sebastian.
Thanks, Matt.
You promoted him.
I know. I'm like, I don't mind being called Saban. I mean, he ran an educational course for a long, long time.
Yeah.